Does it ask you to consent on this thing?
Yeah. Yes.
Cool. I love that Zoom started asking for consent like a year into the pandemic. They're like, oh, maybe consent is something important. But I am so excited to be here with you. I'm here today with Lienne Dagger, who is an incredible domina and content producer who is always showing up with beautifully made up face. I'm always so impressed with your makeup and a unique and inspiring perspective to Femdom. So I'm super excited to be here chatting with you today. My name is Danielle Blunt. I am a pro-dom based out of New York City and a content producer in the pandemic. And I'd love if you could just start introducing yourself and telling me a little bit about your Femdom practice.
Hello, my name is Lienne Dagger. I am a dominatrix based in Columbus, Ohio. I produce fetish content and also this content, and just an overall sexual deviant. So I have started producing just fetish content and joining the sex work industry a little bit before the pandemic, and just I was just dipping my toe into it, or I should say just like took a huge splash, and then the whole pandemic hit and was like, well, I guess this is what I'm going to be doing for a while. So far it has been a very interesting experience and a few years into this journey of producing content, but I really love the idea that I could create a vision into an experience without even having to be in the room with somebody else is very interesting, because that's how I think most people got into BDSM in the first place. So
through something they saw online is definitely like a wormhole. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about like what creating like a virtual like how you go about creating a virtual fetish or femdom experience for someone. I know that like for so many people, especially in the pandemic, it has been such a respite to be able to explore this part of their sexuality. And I know for clients that have been approaching me, I've gotten a lot of newbies who kind of have been quarantining alone or isolated and can like no longer deny that kink and BDSM are part of their sexuality, is kind of like crawling out of the woodwork. Like, hi, I've been following you for 9 years. And like, now's the time. I have like nothing else to distract
all the time.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear about how you kind of like hold space for like kink and BDSM in the virtual realm.
I had education in psychology, and I just find the way that when somebody gets fixated or obsessed, like I myself think that I'm quite an obsessive person, or have that kind of tendency. So I like to think, when I create a video, I like to think about how this person get a seed planted in their head in the first place, and then how it manifests into different kind of arousal or different kind of emotion in their body and in their head, and how they like kind of attach it to like externally, like to a hot girl or to cocks or like to whatever it is, to boobs, you know, like things like that. So I like to think how it developed, like how a kink developed, and then just kind of like talk about that, just like kind of explore what really turned them on about a fetish. So yeah.
I love that. And I think it's so similar to my approach. I also have a background in psychology. I'm not a psychologist, but studied psychology in undergrad, and am so interested in like the thing that makes someone weak, because everyone has like their Achilles heel or some way to kind of get control over their mind and their psyche and their sexuality. And then like from there to begin to play with it, or to like plant seeds of your own so that you get to like control.
Yes. The mind is very malleable. It's very like plasticky and moldable. And like everybody is even dominant or submissive. It's just whether you know about it or not. And like, take it to an extreme.
Okay. So my follow-up question to that is, I feel like so much is talked about like submissives and submissive desires, and like what you just said was really interesting to me. And I'm curious, have you ever had a submissive like fetish get into your head, into that like obsessive thought pattern? I know that for myself, I feel very skilled at like installing fetishes in other people, but I have had a few submissives whose fetishes were so like robustly like explored, and their like interest in it was so hot that it became something that I became very into, like outside of our sessions.
Interesting. I do really just, I like intensity. So I like it in both like dominant and submissive form. So I do think that I haven't encountered a lot of submissive who are like that intense anymore, but I definitely like so like my partner, who's my also like my personal submissive, who like really into like chastity, and it's something I just grown to really love, because like just to see the way that they react, and just all the things that comes with it, like, and I do think that like kink is just so expansive, so there's always more to explore.
Yeah, and so much of it is like that teasing of desire, and like elongating a sexual interaction to like be as big as it can be, and like going to like the edge, and like kind of just like pushing what is allowed and what is desired is so hot. And that's so fun that you could, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's what people miss, and that's what people kind of just geared toward, especially during the pandemic, because like you just kind of realize how boring and like monotonous your daily routine kind of is. Just like go to work, blah blah blah, do this, do that. And I think like once the pandemic hit and everybody was in lockdown, like they really just looking toward the extreme, like they kind of look toward the intensity and just a little bit of escapism, during a trying time.
Yeah, I'm so curious. Something I spend a lot of time thinking about is, how will people fetishize the trauma of the pandemic? And like, I feel like we're going to see more mask fetishes.
More mask. Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm curious if like if you've noticed any like changes, or in both what your interests are in kink, or what kind of requests people are getting. I feel like I'm so interested in playing with distance, and fluids has become definitely more appealing the more taboo that it's become.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting because you mentioned that. I definitely, like, for me personally, I definitely have a more fixation toward gloves these days. Like I'm used to just kind of like just the aesthetics, but now I'm just like kind of zoning in on it, and I just kind of feel it developing in my head. Request wide, I don't, I'm not sure if I see any difference, but I do think that I do get a lot of clients who are exploring their like gender fluidity more, because that's something that I'm personally kind of geared toward as well. Like that's something that I expressed in myself, and I think that attract a lot of people who are going through the same kind of journey. What about those kind of like, do you see those patterns when during these pandemic too, of people like just exploring more the gay side?
Yeah, I think the gender exploration sessions are something I've always like enjoyed and specialized in, and like tried to like manifest more of those type of sessions.
Yes.
I think it's such a fertile space to play with, but I really do think that like the isolation so many people are experiencing in the pandemic really gives a lot of space both to think about your sexuality and your gender, especially if you are now working remotely in a space where you don't really have to perform your gender or perform like the gender that you had been performing before the pandemic every day, and sort of taking some time outside of that performance of gender, I think can really open up a lot of space for people to explore their gender more and have more expansive manifestations of their gender. So I've definitely been seeing a lot of people who are interested in exploring gender through like the lens of a kink dynamic, who are exploring their gender in many different ways. So I'm definitely seeing some of that, which is, it's so fun. And I think it's something that both of us have produced content on and are very interested in. And I would love to hear a little bit about like how you approach gender in your sessions, how you play with gender, like how you play with cross-dressing and sissies, and like just like kind of what your perspective is in that you say that you enjoy.
See, I read a lot of like, I used to read a lot of like just feminist and like gender critical theories texts. And like gender in and of itself, to me, is already such a mind fuck. Because, you know, like you kind of just have a very, especially in Western society, you have a very rigid roles of what each gender should be like. But like these days, it's become much and more lax than it used to be, but still, it's just kind of ingrained very deeply in us. Where was I going with that? Okay, so I think the way that I like to play with gender within a kink context is like most of the time, like the people who look toward to like my forced bi content or like my sissy content, or usually have like an inkling in themselves. But I think it's not that I'm making them bi, because they already have that feelings prior to knowing about me. So it's very interesting, and which also ties to like the censorship around that kind of category of like gender mindfuck, and like being forced, the keyword forced by being like modified into multiple versions of it.
Yes.
So I really,
just for anyone listening, the forced category on a lot of clip sites aren't allowed by payment processors. So they've changed it into so many, I can't even think of any of them.
Yeah, it's like forced by, coerced by, and now it's become encouraged by.
Yeah. And positive, positive domination.
Positive femdom is very interesting, which is something that I you know, like as a new content producer, is kind of a headache to deal with. But going back to the gender mindfuck thing, it's like I already someone who's very critical of my own gender performance, like, because it's all performance, it's all something that you do, you know, like what you think of like being feminine, like dressing a certain way, is something that you just kind of do. And if you want to be a different gender, you just kind of do it. And I just feel like be able, but it's so easy for me to get to that headspace, but it's not as easy for somebody else who has been like heavily conditioned by what society say about gender roles. So for me to be able to craft a certain narratives to just kind of peel that conditioning and then install my own kind of ideology into them, or like install my own kind of like just little seed of like, this is what you always have been, is it's very satisfying for me and for the people who also like consume those kind of content. And I think they kind of like the idea that like they kind of like the idea that, you know, a hot woman is making me suck cocks and things like that. But it's like, I'm not making you do anything. Like you already want to do it. Like, you know, like it's very interesting how people interpret this kind of situation, whereas, you know, different perspective can like varies in very many different realities.
Yeah, I I kind of laugh at the forced because what you're saying is so true, that if someone is approaching, like, it's so obvious, like if someone is approaching you for a forced buy session, they already want to suck a dick. Like
Yeah.
it's very clear that they have that desire, and then it is through like the construct of like doing it, being forced to do it by a hot woman is what gives them permission to do it, and what like allows them to be present and pursue that sexual experience. And like maybe this is me only doing what I like to do, or being a bad dom, or like being really sadistic, but I'm like, actually, like, I'm not gonna let you suck a dick until you admit that you want that cock down your fucking throat. Like you're gonna have to beg for that cock that you want me to force you to suck. And it's just so much more fun for me, because it is that force in like BDSM scenes and like CNC scenes, like consensual non-consent scenes, or instances like forced buy scenes or forced cross-dressing scenes, I've always kind of shied away from. And because I think for me personally, what is so much more interesting is when people are really confronting that desire that makes it want to be forced. And it sounds like that's a little bit about what you're doing and your clips as well. And I saw one of your tweets recently, which just said, a reminder, if you're questioning your heterosexuality, then you're probably not straight. And I think it's so, like, so true, a great tweet. And also like so much of what is at the crux of the kind of content that we're talking about, that forced buy and cross-dressing content. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about that and like how you approach that in the content that you make.
I usually like those kind of clips. I just kind of like just mostly just speak my mind. Like, I really do think that guys are really, they like being forced because I think they just want to have an explicit permission from like a very attractive authority. But I, you know, like I think I'm a positive femdom in the way that I like to use my power to just, you know, make them realize that this has always kind of been the case for you. Which is very interesting when they kind of like just realize like, oh yeah, so like this is what it is. But I think that is the way that we kind of explore these kind of different part of ourselves is what the whole part of the human experience more fulfilling, you know, because I feel like if you already know everything about yourself, it wouldn't be that fun. But like I do like being the conduit of just like helping them just like accept themselves in general and just having fun, you know, like just having pleasure. I think that's the fun of being a sex worker. It's just like embracing in like the pleasurable aspect of the human experience.
Yeah. And I feel like pleasure and joy are something that is just not prioritized in so many people's lives. And I often like joke about what's so like healing or cathartic about a session with a dom is that your phone's not fucking on for like 2 hours. And you leave your phone away. You leave like kind of some of the confines of the structure of your everyday life, and you are monotasking on pleasure and articulating your desires in a way that there just isn't a whole lot of space to do in everyday life. Like people don't create that kind of space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, it's so necessary. And so I think like what you're talking about, so much of what we do is help facilitate that space.
Yes. And it's kind of, and just right now, I'm mostly just function online. So it really blurs for me and for my clients, it kind of blurs the line of like, what's reality, what's fantasy, and like augmented reality, and how much of our online on-screen world is now a part of our world. Like it's not as separate like that as it used to be anymore. But then like some boundaries, it's still healthy, you know.
Boundaries are good. Okay, so I would love to talk about this. And it kind of goes back to like how we started the conversation, which I was thinking of editing out, but maybe I won't. When Zoom gives you the consent button, I think it's so interesting because I'd been using Zoom for like a year, and I remember being in this call where I was on camera and they started recording, and I was like, you don't have my fucking permission to record me. Like, what the fuck are you doing? And like Zoom didn't have that integration to like give you the opportunity to consent into being recorded or an opportunity to turn off your camera. And so I think it's interesting kind of watching tech evolve to be in these spaces where we are interacting with them in more intimate ways, and where we are interacting with them like for a significant portion of our lives right now in the pandemic. I personally definitely didn't start sex work to be online all day. So making my boundaries a little bit more concrete have definitely helped me avoid burnout. But I would love to hear you talk a little bit about this like augmented reality. Recently, I've been having fantasies about my new like startup, which is big mother surveillance technologies, where where maybe like also
baby camera.
Yes. Little nanny cams everywhere with like electroshock integration, where like someone will be shocked if they don't say their mantra on time, or if they're not like kneeling at a certain time. And like, I definitely have been like having a lot of fun with that fantasy, and like have played around with that a little bit. But I would love to hear a little bit about how you play with like augmented reality with your submissives.
Yeah, I think augmented reality, it kind of, it's the way that it is right now, because we just can't stop the development and integration of technology into our life. And like the connection that we solely made online still feels very real. Like when, you know, like when they talk to me just mostly on the phone or through text messages, like that's still a relationship to us. Or like when I talk to my mutual on Twitter, etc. Even though like we haven't met in person, like I still feels like a certain type of connection with them. But then like it's kind of straddled this line of like your parasocial relationship and like what's healthy and what's not, and what's personal and what's professional. So it's kind of like when I talk to my clients, I will usually like to set a time in a time of day of like just my life and have them do the same and things like that. So like we not just, or if they don't, or like if I don't want to like spend all my time like just talking to them, like that's when clips comes in, and just like the idea of like, oh, you know, like they can hear my voice and feel my presence without me being in the room. And especially with technology like VR and things like that developing, it's very exciting for like to be in this kind of like porn producing content. Which also what I've been kind of learning being on platform is that the kind of content is gaining a lot of popularity is like mesmerize, kind of mind fuck with a lot of like special effects and things like that, which makes me think of how people just really likes a certain kind of like stimulation and futuristic feels of very being immersed in a kind of virtual reality. Um, so yeah, and like, you know, like even the reality that we live day to day, multiple people argue that, oh, it's just like a simulation, like we do only take in reality with five senses. So like when you watch my clips and that already like your eyes and your auditory senses like 2 out of 3, it's like what's next is very interesting how
those clips that you mentioned, like the mesmerize or hypnosis, which we're not allowed to say on, is another banned word on clip sites. This is something I think about and talk about a lot, is how the censorship on clip sites actually informs the production of fetishes. Like, are people who are into like who are just going on to clip sites now and only seeing mesmerize, like A, how are they going to find hypnosis clips if you can't search it? And B, will they even be able to play, like, I don't know, it like changes some of what is shared when you change the language around it. But I think what I love so much about hypnosis clips, and I'll let you say hypnosis on this if you want, and mesmerize clips, is that I think it's a really amazing way to bring someone into this altered state of consciousness. And when you're talking about like the five senses, I think kind of when they all come together, and like elements of like physical arousal and like imagining what it's like to be kneeling before you and just kind of like melting into themselves as they listen to the sound of your voice and watch like repetitive motion and movement and like all of these like amazing like altered reality edits to these clips is so sexy and such a fun way to get someone's brain into that malleable state. And also it's so meditative too. It like really it's playing with someone's autonomic nervous system for like the manipulation of serving your dom, which I think is just so hot in and of itself.
It is very yeah, I think the trend is just kind of keep being like this for a while, especially with everything being so integrated online. And like the pandemic, the plague is still happening with no end in sight. But I'm very interested to see how these kind of things develop, especially with all the censorship that is going on. It's very interesting because you mentioned like you can't even search hypnosis if you have that fetish on most majority of the clip sites anymore. So because of that, like people would, when something like that is, you know, kind of criminalized, people would go into the black market, which is now like pirated content on tube sites and things like that. So like these censorships issues like really don't solve anything. So is one of the things that I have come into like just hard rude realization from this job. I heard it weren't used to be this way, but I guess it is what it is. But it's very interesting how to see maybe it get repealed, how it developed, and how the technology will build itself around that.
And I think one of the things that we both also have in common is that our names have both been banned to some extent on clip sites. I know that Mistress Blunt on the website I Want Clips was changed to Mistress Smoke, which also made me like very difficult to search. Like, doesn't convey the fact that blunt has multiple meanings.
Yes.
In many spaces, the meaning that they're thinking of is not criminalized. And I know with Lienne Dagger, you've mentioned some like difficulty like showing daggers. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you navigate that.
So yeah, it's because I like the name Dagger because I chose the name Dagger because I like sharp things. I like knives, and I have a dagger collection, and I had a clip which featuring me just like being sexy with my dagger, like threatening him like I would cut his balls off. And I can't post it anywhere on any of the clip site. It was either still in review purgatory after MasterCard changed their content review policy or whatever. And then for other, they just straight up not deleted it. So and the thing is like the dagger is actually not sharp, like is not used to cut things. So it's just very interesting what they what they consider violence, what these kind of banking institutions consider violence, and how it kind of affects just very random, irrational, irrelevant things in just like content production.
And in being like a newer content producer, I'm curious what it's been like entering the industry with like already some of these like rules and protocols in place, and kind of figuring that out on the fly, like how you've been able to figure that out, and what it's been like to then like have all of your clips go under review and things like that. How has that kind of impacted how you work and like how you feel about the work that you do?
It's definitely made me like prioritize certain things over others. I think, like, first of all, staying consistent during a pandemic is already hard. Doing multiple jobs, why, like, you gotta plan, you gotta do your makeup, lighting, editing, uploading, and all the censorship things is only a part of the uploading post-production part, and you have to do all the part leading up to it that I need to learn. So it's all been a very steep learning curve and learning process. But you know, like I believe in my methods, and like I believe in my inevitable success. So it's kind of like I'm trying to like prioritize interaction with certain clients over just wasting my time just mourning these kind of clip side on things that, you know, like I can't control, and like they barely can't control, because I already know that corporations are really not your friend.
Yeah.
So but yeah, just like really trying to like figure out like what do I need to do to make this job more sustainable and more pleasurable to me, because that's why I wanted to do it in the beginning. So yeah.
Have you figured it out? Asking for a friend.
it ebbs and flow, you know, like sometimes I feel like I got it, and then the next day it's like, maybe I don't. And then, you know, like you change every day and you learn something new every day, and you run into new problems every day. So I think right now I kind of have got into a groove of like what I'm doing thing, but like by kind of stepping to year 2, 3-ish. And it's been really interesting, just how the direction of my content change, and like just like see myself improving is also really rewarding.
How would you say that Mistress Lienne Dagger has kind of evolved in their style of domination, and like what you're interested in and the type of content that you're producing from when you started a few years ago to kind of where you see yourself going in the future, and what you kind of like want to call in when like so like from like favorite fetishes to the type of things that you want to make or skills that you want to learn?
Ooh, I love these questions. You ask such good questions. So I started out as like just a model, you know, like, so I started out to do like nude modeling and things like that. And I had this, like, the story of how I started thinking about producing my own fetish content is that I did a paid foot fetish shoot, and the videographer was just kind of weird and like asking invasive questions, and like his set was just kind of ugly. So I was like, I can do better than this. Like I can do this myself. So that's when I started just kind of dive into like producing my own content. So, you know, like in the beginning, I had one video where I just like masturbate in front of the mirror, film with my phone. And like it looks so shitty, but like it's still one of my best seller on the clip store. It's like 2 minutes for over 10 bucks, and people still buy it. Like that's how horny dudes are. But and now I kind of like, and then after that I kind of produce contents like I thought would sell, but then, you know, in the beginning, like it never sell as well as you would hope it would be. And so now I kind of ebb into like what's the feeling, or like just making the kind of content that I feel good when I look at it. Like it kind of turns me on when I edit it, you know, and not just kind of based much on like what the expectation of what I want it to be, or like how it to perform. And I find like that has been much more rewarding and also better for my mental health overall. For the future, I definitely want to gear more toward like intricate storytelling, you know, like I think like right now I like talking about just like fantasies and like role play. And once I kind of have like the just kind of like the expertise, you know more people in the field, more budget, more fundings from patrons, is I would definitely want to do more like just more like intricate fantasy, you know, like with characters, multiple characters, and like more a cinematic feel to it. I also just kind of wanted to interact also with the audience more, because like the femdom POV kind of like, yeah, like the femdom POV category is very popular. It's like always sell on sites like Clip for Sale or I1 Clips, mostly because like it's, I think, or in my opinion, because it interacts, it makes the audience feel included. So I definitely feel like in the future, I want to do something, especially with VR and augmented reality, like something that makes the audience feel like more immersed and inclusive, more interactive with the media. And I overall just think that's how media is going, like in general, as an industry, and not just porn, is going to progress into as well. So yeah, it's all very exciting.
I shot a VR porn scene during the pandemic, and for kink VR, and it was so interesting because the person whose cock we were using was literally, it was just a stunt cock, and like the whole camera rig was over them and just looking down at their cock while I was like telling my submissive like how to bring pleasure to my friend. And like the whole time I was super turned on, mostly because of how objectifying it was of the person in the stunt cock, which was like not at all what the vibe of the video was, but like I couldn't see their head. It was behind like 4 cameras and they were just a cock. And I was like, this is super hot. And like, this is not at all what like the POV.
It's like a cyborg.
Yeah, but it's not what the clip will look like. The clip will just look like POV fucking someone. But for me, like I was really into this. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Like you are just a cock. You are just there to like make this. And that was what I was really enjoying about that was the like brutal objectification in the creation of this VR clip. But I like that. I love that. And I hate looking at old clips, first of all, but it's so interesting. I was like just going through a bunch of my old clips I was like editing a trailer for something of my OnlyFans and was looking at old clips and I'm like, oh, that's hot. And I'm like getting flustered and turned on. And I'm like, okay, as long as I'm like making content that like turns me on, like is wonderful. And my best-selling clips are all filmed by my ex-boyfriend where I was just speaking.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was like, because he was my submissive and I would just be talking to him. Like it was like for our sex life. And so there was this pre-established dynamic that was there, a little bit more like movement of the camera, and I think more fun for me to shoot, being able to like see someone responding to my content was really fun for me. And like I also have like an audio clip of me humiliating a girlfriend, and like it's one of my best sellers. And I think there's something that's so fun about being able to share some of those dynamics for me in my content that I have had a really fun time with, for sure.
Yes.
But yeah, I love thinking about like what does the future look like for Lienne Dagger, and I'm curious if you have any other questions or anything you want to share about the work that you do, or anything else you want to make sure we include in the conversation.
I think I pretty much talked all about what I wanted to bring up today. Like I'm really interested in just facilitating the way that how everybody can explore pleasure and explore their own sexuality in a very intense and also intimate way.
I love that. And for folks who are listening or watching, where can people find you if they want to find more of your content or interact with you?
So my only social media is on Twitter at Mistress Lienne. I don't have an Instagram anymore. If you find me Mistress Lienne on Instagram, that's an imposter. You can also find my content on leagueoflienne.com or bingeonlienne.com.
Amazing. And if you're interested in finding my content, I am at Mistress Blunt on Twitter and Instagram, on OnlyFans /Mistress Blunt. And you can click here to ruinyourlife.com is my favorite URL that I own. I love all the vanity.
I love that URLs. One.
Yeah, I love the vanity URLs that sex workers have. There are some really creative ones. I also own the domain husbandtrainer.com, but I haven't made that website yet. It's on my to-do list for sure. Well, Lienne, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It was such a pleasure chatting with you. And I'm very excited to continue our online Twitter crush / parasocial relationship that we have.
Yes, pleasure all mine.